Hello. Okay, yeah, I should be recording now. Sorry, a little pause as the record kicks in.
Right.
Hello, Simeon. How you doing?
Hello, Matthew. How are you?
I'm very good, thanks. Can I get a gender-based rights from you?
Simeon, Harmon, he, him pronouns.
Cool. Are you for gender-based rights?
Oh, sorry. Yes, I'm
Based. You for
very much for
sex-based
gender.
rights?
No,
No, you
not
don't want those
particularly.
sex-based rights. That's a hot take.
In some cases, I don't think I should have the right to have sex with you. No, I think that's a bit messed up.
Wow. Okay, well, that's a great
Uh,
start. That's a real spicy take there, Simeon. Like you've not called that.
uh, in, So I think that if this is the conversation we're having, I'm happy to have it. But
I mean, I was
I
just throwing
think
this out as a bit. I wasn't expecting such a spicy takes from you, Simeon, so early on out the
I know
gate.
it's I'm out there. I'm on the fringe.
Wow. I
I'm on
mean,
the extreme
I'm
end.
pro sex-based rights and pro gender-based rights.
Okay, I'm
I've yet to really see any gender-based rights legislation that interferes with sex-based rights. That's not something
I
I've seen. So
I think that both are very important under different circumstances, and it's very
agreed,
important to
agreed.
it's very important to judge whether or not you're discussing people's needs based on their gender or based on their sex in a given scenario. So, for
I
example,
completely agree. I completely
yeah.
agree, and
So, for
I also
yeah,
think it's very important when crafting legislation that one is mindful that if one is creating protections for one protected class, that in creating those protections, one isn't, say, removing or diluting protections for another protected class. A hot potato at the moment happens to be sex and gender, but I include that for like age discrimination, political affiliation, disability, all these things.
I think I think that's very fair. I think it's very important to make sure you don't remove any protections for other people whilst you do give it to others. But in circumstances where you sort of have to do that, it's very important to minimize the amount of harm that could possibly be done in those circumstances. And even in
I'm
circumstances where
actually,
you do that,
yeah.
uh, even in circumstances where you do that, it's very important to mitigate any sort of harm
I'm
that could
hard
possibly
pressed to
happen.
think of a scenario of any legislation that's come out recently that does dilute any other protected classes' rights, though.
No, but well, you could talk about the recent immigration legislation that is infringes on the right of asylum seekers to uh, enter the
Are
UK.
asylum seekers
And
covered under the Equalities Act? I genuinely don't
uh,
know. Like,
I
just to be
generally
clear.
don't know. But I do
Um,
think asylum seekers have a right to go to the country of their go to the country of their choice and
to
claim
seek
and
asylum
try
in a
and
country of
to
their
seek
choosing. Yeah,
asylum.
no,
Yeah.
I completely agree.
Mm.
I completely agree with you there, but I'm not aware of any legislation that infringes on that protected.
The recent legislation suggested by the government is one where everyone that arrives here through non legislative means would be deported. So including asylum seekers, which means asylum seekers don't have a chance to apply for asylum in the UK because there is no place in Calais or anywhere else where they can do that.
Okay, I mean that certainly sounds like an infringement on one's right to claim asylum. So I mean,
Mm.
if that legislation gets passed, I mean, it's not been passed; it's being debated, right?
It's being debated it's being debated at the moment. Yes, there
Do
was
you
a
think? Do you think that
gone.
once that hits the House of Lords, that's likely to go through? If it indeed makes it to the House of
If
Lords.
it indeed makes it to House of Lords. I honestly don't know. I think that there's enough polling against the idea to uh, make sure that enough polling against the idea to reasonably say that we're not going to pass it because it's not popular enough. So, for example, the recent polling on it found that actually, whilst there's different viewpoints on it, the largest minority of people, I think it was 39%, want the problem to be solved by uh, I think by an asylum a place to seek asylum in Calais rather than anything else, rather than going straight after people arriving.
When you say seek asylum, do you mean they will seek asylum within the UK via France, or do you mean they should claim asylum in France?
I think what the French have offered before and the UK government has turned
Oh yeah,
down,
they
which I
did
think they
refuse
shouldn't.
to set up a
Yeah, Yeah, because
Yeah, whatever the hell it was called. Yeah, yeah.
this then stops the dangerous boats. This means that people don't have to cross the channel to seek an asylum. They can do
Yeah,
it
but
from
that
the
makes it
safety of
too easy for people to get in the UK, and as we all know, every refugee is trying to get to the UK.
every single
UK, the
one, just
UK
every
gets
single
the
one.
most asylum seeker requests, as we all know. It's the UK who has to
It's
carry the majority of the burden of the refugee
yeah,
crisis, as we all know. These are just hard
yeah.
facts. I mean,
I mean, just one. I mean, I don't know what the letter M means when it comes to numbers, but I can only see that some other countries have only taken like 1.2 asylum seeker. So,
um,
so is that unless the letter M right at the end of that number means
well, we've got
something different? I'm not
1.2
sure.
million asylum seekers.
Well, I think Germany took in. I think at least one country. I think it might be France.
I mean, Germany
Took in
took in like 4
1.2.
million like 5 years ago.
Yeah, I guess like huge numbers, yes, and their
They
crime
were very
rate
much
went
hoping that the
down
rest of Europe would
weirdly.
follow suit, but oh well.
Yeah, imagine if only.
But anyway, that's enough simping for the dirty fucking government. We're here to discuss. We're here to discuss the merits of government versus no government.
Yes, indeed. Yes. This is something that you and I have discussed before. That we have very different views on it, but for I think both with good reasoning behind it. I think we both come at it from different angles and come to a different conclusion, but for good reason. At least that's my view. You may think differently, but I so what we discussed is the idea. What is the solution to a bad government? What is the thing? What is the best cure for a country that produces bad governments through democracy or other means? My suggestion would be that, well, because power is all relative and power will always exist even between two people or groups of people or anything else, and power will always be sought by the greedy. It's very important to have a good government, which is one that is democratically elected by people with full knowledge of what they're voting for, and with through compassion and understanding and based on a system of human rights.
Okie dokie. Strong open. So, cards on the table. Probably useful if I just point out that I'm an anarchist. What comes with being an anarchist is an inherent skepticism of a lot of different types of enforced hierarchy, up to and including the existence of the state. So, where it's a simple way of thinking of like a difference between left and right wing politics is that the left wing is concerned with addressing injustice stemming from an enforced hierarchy, whereas right wing politics is in favour of maintaining enforced hierarchies irrespective of what injustice they might cause. Anarchism, which is a type of left wing political ideology, takes that notion one step further by arguing that not only should one be concerned with injustice stemming from enforced hierarchy, anarchism contends that an inherent feature of enforced hierarchy is always going to be injustice. Wherever you create an enforced hierarchy can mean all sorts of different things. So everyone's heard of the phrase the patriarchy, for example. In feminist theory, that's the idea that society is set up in a highly gendered way that favors different genders, each gender for very specific gendered roles. This both impacts women and it impacts men in similar fashion. So, for example, it can be considered socially unacceptable for men to be caregivers. There can be a stigma surrounding male nurses, male nannies, for example. Similarly, women in positions of authority can also you can exist in a patriarchal society that's against that. So this is an example of enforced hierarchy. Another enforced hierarchy would be the state, and an inherent feature of the state is that it is a consolidation of power behind an abstract concept that is like the nation state. Interestingly, like there's a lot of more far right political theories that kind of, for example, fascism, that kind of idealize the state. There's examples of like Marxist-Leninist socialist countries that do a very similar thing, idolization of the state, where the needs of the state are primary and the needs of the citizens are secondary. So for me, the underlying question is, when governments exist, um, do they tend towards producing good outcomes, or do they tend towards producing poor outcomes? And I would argue that as statecraft has become more sophisticated, particularly in the last 400 years, the results kind of speak for themselves. We currently exist in a sixth mass extinction event. Whether or not you agree with climate change or not, or whether or not you agree it's caused by human beings, the fact is that our economic activity, spurred on by powerful statecraft, have resulted in true tangible changes to our environment. So much so that our environment is becoming increasingly hostile to our own ability to live in it. I would contend that you can directly attribute this to the increased intensity of governments. So that's my opening pitch. Apologies, I went on a bit longer than you, buddy.
No, that's absolutely fine. So going off your pitch, particularly in the government's ability, in the government's, so you classed it as the government assisting and even going, like, being even the front runner for destructive things such as climate change by pushing for fossil fuel, etc. My position very much would be that this, in the absence of government, this would have occurred. This kind of modernization would occur anyway, just with different, just, well, the power to produce easier and quicker and more powerful things like cars, for example, is something that would naturally appeal to people anyway. I understand that there's often lobbying and so on that pushes governments to create ecosystems around which things can thrive, such as subsidies or the creation of roads, etc. But I do maintain that these things would produce in the absence of government, and governments in these cases don't so much create the environment for which these things would prosper, but allow these things to prosper because they see them as prosperous. And the only thing that can, so it's a case of allowing it to happen, whereas I would say that the only thing that can also stop it happening is a very powerful institution that is dedicated to the well-being of people, and that would be a government of some form or another. If that makes sense.
So that's fine. So you contend that if statecraft didn't exist, that technological development as it exists today would have occurred anyway.
Not so much that it exists today, but the emission. If we are talking about climate change in particular, the emission of fossil fuels through technology
the emission of fossil fuels is directly tied to the invention of the steam engine. The invention of the steam engine is directly tied to having an academic class within society, and you can directly tie the existence of an academic class to the existence of a state.
But because a state has state-run schools, and then those bring academics and from bring everything.
As societies get more, in air quotes, complex, you create a ruler class. That's why kings were created. It's why the administrators and the written form were created at granaries back when we first became agrarian. Out of that came a more complex, in air quotes here. Okay, I'm highly skeptical of this kind of language. We like to view, for example, tribal communities as the primitive savage. But this is all loaded language that is designed to, I would argue this is all loaded language that is designed to predispose someone to simp for statecraft, which, let's be clear, if any state-run education system, or indeed any education system backed by an enforced hierarchy, is never going to teach you methods in order for you to question the validity of their authority. Right.
Unless deliberately built so, with the
You can argue that if you want, but I would contend that
It
literally,
hasn't. It
I
hasn't.
would
It
contend that is
hasn't. Yes.
literally the claim and excuse made by every tyrant in history that they were there to reset things, to make things better, and every single time they made things tangibly worse.
The,
Case in
cla-
point,
the
case in point, the situation we currently find ourselves in. You can directly tie all of it again to the existence of statecraft.
the claim to be so, but yes. But what if a state was set up to actually do that?
Well, every time that the attempt has been made to do that, it turns out power tends to corrupt. So although these things start up with the best of intentions, nonetheless, power corrupts.
But does that mean? But does that mean we should give up on the promise, on the idea?
My contention is that yes, that it actually would be better that we return to monkey, return to tradition. That with the
Very
with the
traditional.
dissolution. So I mean, for example, like there are communities that exist like this. If you look at like Sentinel Island, that's a tribal community that has existed stably for hundreds and hundreds of years, with bare minimum of our interference, and will continue to do so. They exist just fine. They are able to subsist on their environment, and they are able to exist there without harming their environment. The same cannot be said of civilized society, which seems unable to exist without destroying the environment in which it exists in.
It. I disagree that it seems incapable of. I think it hasn't, but I don't think it seems incapable of. I think the answers have been very clear to us for a long time in terms of
The answers have been clear, but the ability to implement them aren't there because, again, power corrupts. Despite we
yeah,
saw
but not, yeah,
we saw
but,
this with
but
we
not
saw this
but
with
not
Enron.
state
Go on, sorry.
but not state power, industrial power, financial power.
It is okay. So that's you can go down that route if you want, but the trouble with that is the existence of the state, primarily as it exists today, is there to protect the property rights of industrialists. So there is no getting around that. It's why Labour is described as Tory light, because whenever someone comes in who actually proposes some radical shit that is actually questioning the current economic system which we currently operate under, everything is done to remove them from power successfully, I might add.
This is
also
true,
the case for the US with Bernie. So
yes,
it's like apparently not. Like you can argue that that's industrialists that have pulled that off, but the fact remains they pulled it off. The fact remains that they control the levers of power that are the state. We do not.
but
Now
in the
you can
absence,
say all it takes is someone to solve it, but the fact is that isn't happening. The status quo remains.
but in the absence of the state, the owners of property will just defend their property anyway.
Okay, so what they're gonna
The government,
create chain gangs and force people to work for them. Is that your contention?
Well, through enslavement wages, etc. Yes, and and their own bodyguards, which act as their sort of small private army.
There are numerous examples of people being able to people detaching themselves from those things. I mean, because it turns out all you really need is food and clean water and a roof over your head, and as long as you have access to those things, human beings survive. Again, I draw your attention to Sentinel Island. Am I suggesting that transitioning over to a no government global society would be easy? Absolutely not. But the contention I am making is that your claim that the solution to bad government is good government is incorrect, because even if you manage to pull off a good government, you have still consolidated power, and all it takes is for someone to get into power and utilize that consolidated power in a way that is not good. In air quotes, good.
Yeah, don't misunderstand me. This isn't a permanent solution. Government, the existence of a good government could always become a bad government by electing someone bad.
Whereas my contention is no government is better, and I have pointed to historical examples as to why that is the case.
So first, the two things I would say on that is, one, better is this may be a assumption on my part, but
Go on.
it seems to me that you seem to be pushing for the end of industrialization and modernization as well.
As we
Given
know
the
it, yeah, for sure. Absolutely.
which better is a strong term given the
Well,
importance of.
let's look at what happened when the industrialization started. People moved into cities and life expectancy dropped.
Moving
So,
cities.
in that regards, people's material circumstances unironically got worse. No.
Well, but yeah, because we didn't have because we had bad government that didn't introduce proper safety standards and air clean standards and proper healthcare and
I'm
food
sorry. I'm
safety
sorry.
standards. And
Is low life expectancy as a result of air pollution still not a thing in London? I believe it is.
it is, but now, but we have a but within
But you're
London
saying,
we have a
but no,
government trying
because
to do
now
a
we
good
have
thing
access to like medical care that can alleviate
and
that problem
clean
that is caused by that.
food and clean water
Oh,
and
we had access to food and clean water pre-industrialization, my friend.
yes, pre-industrialization, but now we can have industrialization and clean water and clean food, which is better.
But the cost for that is that our planet is increasingly becoming hostile to us being on it. Is that better?
It's not. It is not better. It is not. Is it? Is it?
I mean, for me,
I'm not sure
bluntly, I contend that no, that is not better. Unironically, we as a species, and also every other species on this planet, would unironically be in a better situation if industrialization had not occurred.
Unless you have, how do you get such a large amount of food and a large amount of healthcare and a large amount
Firstly,
anything,
if you exist in an environment that isn't full of pollutants, your need for healthcare massively drops. Funnily enough.
Yes. Yes, but people still died of their teeth.
Also, it turns out if you live in small-scale communities where you all know each other and you all support each other, and those kinds of things, it turns out both your quality of life and the length of your life goes up.
The quality of your life goes up.
Everything I've just described there, the current economic system, is actively hostile towards you doing. And pretty much every global north government currently exists to maintain that economic system.
Each one intends to, but it can be used for other purposes.
No, as I've already explained to you, every single time someone even got close to trying to change that, the system automatically corrected to maintain the status quo. And that is an inherent, and as an anarchist, I can tell you that is an inherent feature of an enforced hierarchy, is that it will seek to maintain itself, irrespective.
Your use of the word automatically there is misleading. It's not automatic. It was a conscious choice.
It's automatic in the sense that every historical precedent confirms what I've said.
It's a historical precedent, but it's not automatic. The system isn't designed to do it. People choose to do this. People use the system to push people out.
First of all, yes, I completely agree with you. All of this is subject to change if we choose to change it. But I would argue if you're going to do that, you're much better off choosing to dismantle the government and the current economic system than you are trying to create a, in air quotes, good government for reasons already given.
I do disagree because I think modernization is better because if we could get modernization through a clean process, it would be.
In what way is it better? In a material sense? Because in a material sense, I'd argue it's worse.
Why is in a material sense is it worse?
Because the planet is becoming actively hostile to our existence.
Which is something that
rivers are no longer clean to drink from. The seas are no longer fit to bathe in.
In
that material sense, do you see how that is worse?
The rivers are not clean because people dumping them. People dumping them is something that should be illegal under a good government. It would be allowed under a bad government and would be allowed under a bad government. So we'll be allowed under a bad government, and we'll be allowed under a no government. So it's people dumping into.
Okay,
But
here's the
yeah,
thing
okay,
though. Here's the thing though. If you have no government, you don't have the massive cities. You don't have the massive concentration of people. You also don't have the massive population explosion that came from the Industrial Revolution, which means that people no longer live at densities that mean that their waste can concentrate to such a level that consuming river water with their waste in it is hazardous to your health. You see, the environment has a natural carrying capacity as to how much life it can support. Um, Modern day industrialization um, massively sways against that. Does that make sense?
yes,
Right.
but it's some, but it's, but this is uh, be, realistic. What you're talking about is less technology, less,
Well,
yes,
no.
less need for.
Firstly, no, because let's say we return. That doesn't mean all the knowledge that we've accumulated up until now suddenly disappears, does it?
No,
Right. And similarly, let's say hypothetically, because this is a conversation people like to have an awful lot. Let's say, we switch over to a predominantly plant-based diet. The product of that would be that a lot of agricultural land would become surplus to requirements because we actually now need to grow less food. Because, funny enough, most land use for when it comes to agriculture is to grow animal feed.
hmm
Um, so like a product of adopting that behavior of that style of consumption is that you can actually do a sustained retreat from the environment that you have been trying to uh, turn into productive land. So that translates into less. So but and we now have access to things like refrigerators. We have access to better preserving techniques. We have access to better testing to know when something is bad or unfit to eat. Um, I don't. I think it is quite possible to construct a more anarchic society that still maintains some degree of that. It's just we won't have the really fancy stuff like superconducting. Cryogenically frozen electromagnets, so we won't have things like MRI machines. Okay, that's unfortunate. But, we won't have things like whatever generation in integrated circuit that we're on currently, or like chip design. I forget the terminology for it, but yeah, those things won't exist. But to think that somehow all human knowledge suddenly evaporates because of that, no, that's ridiculous.
no, no,
That's not
no.
how
I'm
things
not
work.
saying I'm not saying all human knowledge does. I'm saying then the ability to put that knowledge into practice does.
For some things, absolutely, I completely agree. But I'm not claiming that. I'm not claiming that there wouldn't be a loss in access to certain goods and services.
Mm.
All I'm pointing out is that the loss of those out of access to those goods and services is not as bad as maintaining access to those goods and services at the expense of our environment.
I I think the scale of the problem requires a more powerful system than that. I think it'd be very difficult to get. So I'm very pessimistic about the government's about about the government's ability to deal with things like climate change. I'm not concerned. I'm more optimistic about a government. I think a government could, but I don't know about. But certainly the governments that we've seen recently would find it very not very difficult, but would choose different paths, but the wrong paths essentially.
Okay,
Uh,
so in what way? In
I
what way would a go on? Sorry, no, finish your point.
well, I was, but I just it's the system of dismantling government. I presume that the last act of government would be to remove power from the mega rich and mega industrial corporations because
Those
the
governments
government just
rely on
going.
industrialists to maintain their power. So I can't see a government ever doing that.
But that's what I mean. But that's what I mean. So
But I'm not.
if the
I'm
idea
not
is,
advocating for ending government by government ending itself. I'm saying the people can end government.
but if the people end government, they just end up with massive corporations that will take the place of the
Well, they
government.
can end those too, can't they? They can choose not to consume their products.
And, and no, what actually happens is some people choose to do it, some people don't choose to do it, and then the people that do choose to do it become the defenders of the corporation and have a new master in the leader of that corporation.
That is their choice to do so, yeah.
It is their choice. No, well, it's also I would say it's also inevitable
Okay, why is it inevitable?
because because corporations exist because the corporations
Do you think
exist
human
because people
beings
do enjoy.
inherently are inclined to inherently bend the knee? Is that what you're getting at?
I think people do. I think if people are asked to bend the knee in exchange for being higher up the hierarchy,
Yeah,
which naturally then
absolutely. So you have to give them a better alternative.
okay, how do I offer them a better alternative than Amazon?
Well, your contention is, we'll vote in the good guys. That's your better alternative.
Yes,
My alternative is cultivate an existence in which you don't have to rely on them for existence.
but you want to though.
Okay, then you're free to do so. I'm not here to dictate to you what you can and can't do.
Do you
Unlike
think the
what you're
world?
trying to do. like,
But yeah, well,
this
yes,
is see, this is
because
where we fundamentally disagree. I'm a libertarian, Simeon. You are an authoritarian.
but
People are
I,
allowed to make the wrong choice. Get over it.
people are yes, but people are allowed to make their own choice. People are allowed to make their own choice, but it has serious consequences for everyone else.
I agree. Which is why I advocate for what I do the way that I do, to inform people of the consequences of their choices. It's down to them whether or not they listen. And to be clear, it is also apparent it is down to them whether or not they have eyes to see it in the first fucking place. But now we're getting into a very different conversation.
Yes, but let's appeal to the people as they currently are and say, well, let's get the right people into power who can take on big corporations,
An
who
inherent
can,
feature of empowering a person with those kinds of power is that they will be inclined not to give up that power.
unless
If you
they
create an enforced
and
hierarchy, literally the second you create an enforced hierarchy, any type of enforced hierarchy, an immediate thing happens. That enforced hierarchy needs to maintain itself. Literally every time you create that is true every time you create an enforced hierarchy.
that
There
no,
is
that's
no
right. Yes, that
example.
is true. Yes,
Sorry?
this is true.
Yeah, yeah,
Yes,
yeah.
this is
So
completely true.
the DAC is immediately stacked against you as soon as you create an enforced hierarchy. Welcome to why
Well,
I point. Welcome to why I argue no government is better than any government, let alone
are people not free to create their own hierarchies?
people are absolutely free to create their own hierarchy,
Does that mean hierarchies are?
which is why all I'm doing here is pointing out what happens when you do that.
But doesn't that mean
It is
hierarchies are?
entirely up to people to decide whether or not they choose to heed that warning. I
But
can't make them.
does that mean hierarchies are inevitable?
Well, it's certainly true that there are certain types of hierarchy that are inevitable. So, like, there's different terminology for that. There's you could call those things like natural hierarchies. Like, so let's say that we lived in an environment where it became necessary for a subset of society to run the 100 meters in under 10 seconds. I have no idea why that would occur, but let's pretend hypothetically that it did. What would that mean?
Yes.
Well, it would mean that only males succeeded at that. There is no woman,
Hmm.
there is no female who has run the 100 meters in under 10 seconds. And it is very unlikely, for some very complicated biological reasons, that there will ever be a female sprinter who can run the 100 in under 10 seconds.
Hmm.
So,
So,
what would we call that? Would we call that a natural hierarchy?
uh, well, I particularly want to focus, if that's all right, on unnatural hierarchies where people choose to put themselves above others or below others for the purpose of lifestyle maintenance. So for conservative reasons, they have people coming in to challenge challenge their right to their material goods, and
Mm-hmm.
they create a hierarchy and an army, let's say a government,
Mm-hmm.
where their goods can be defended as they sort of unionize against this outside force.
Mm-hmm.
That is something that naturally happens,
I agree, and I
and
wholeheartedly support unions.
Well, yes, but then the
They're
government becomes a
voluntary.
state
People can choose to be a part of them, and they can voluntarily associate, and they can voluntarily
until
disassociate. The same
until.
cannot be said, Simeon. The same cannot be said of governments. You
Yes, I'm
cannot.
saying. That's what I'm saying.
You don't
And
volunteer whether or not you associate.
the union becomes a state, is what I'm saying. Once the
You
union
are
has a certain
going
amount of
down.
power,
You
it
are
becomes a
going down the
state.
route of Marxist-Leninist thought.
I am.
That is a hard pass on my part. Sorry.
I'm not. I'm not endorsing it. I'm not endorsing anything.
Yeah, I know, and I'm
I'm saying
pointing
what
out to you.
happened.
No, but I am pointing out to you the rhetoric you are engaging in is this rhetoric.
It's
So
not.
this
It's
is me
not. I'm not
cautioning you,
endorsing
Simeon.
anything. I'm.
Simeon, this
I'm.
is me cautioning you that
Yeah.
maybe you don't want to go down this route.
I'm not endorsing anything. I'm simply saying what dominoes fall after what domino after
No,
you
that
push
isn't
one down
inevitable. There's plenty of examples of unions that didn't resort to becoming a de facto state
in a stateless society.
in a stateless society.
A union in a stateless
There is no
society did.
example of a stateless society existing forming a union. What are you talking about?
But this is my point. If in a stateless society
In a
where
stateless
people union,
society, sorry, first of all, Simeon, in a stateless society, power would never get consolidated to the point where one person needed to be one entity needed to be unionized against. Case in point, literally 95,000 years of human history.
this is no.
Yes.
If you are no, because if you no, here's what no. If a larger man comes up to you and says, give me your food, and to stop them, you say to your neighbor, help me push this person away, then
That's
you
an
would
option.
unionize with
The other
someone.
option you have is feed them.
Yeah.
Bring them into your tribe, bring them into your community. If someone comes to rob you, you could call the police, or you could invite them into your home and ask them what they need. Welcome to mutual aid.
But this is okay. A large person comes up to you and says, I am now in charge of you.
Then, okay, good luck with that.
What do you mean? Good luck with that.
You're welcome to try to make me.
Then they'll kill you.
Okay.
And then they'll or you could say to your friend, "There's two of us."
Or I could
one
wait
of
till
them.
they're asleep and kill them. If that's the ultimatum they want to give me, I can work with that.
But you're already dead.
Well, no, hang on. Oh, okay, fine. I'm already dead. Cool, you got me, buddy.
But you don't want to be dead though, right?
Well, it's why I modified my answer, but you didn't seem to want to let me. So.
I'm sorry.
Okay, so we'll start this again.
Go for it.
Bigger person comes
Yeah.
and says you're in charge, and I say, okay. I wait till they're asleep and I kill them. There we go. Dealt with. What's the next question?
Okay, a group of people who take turns sleeping.
Okay. Do I know, like, where am I? What's the context here?
So you are a person in an anarchist society, minding your own business, growing your own crops, etc. And
Okay, I pick up my preserves, I pick up some fresh water, I pick a direction, and I leave. They're welcome to chase
okay.
me. They're welcome to chase me.
Okay, what is the permanent solution to this?
The permanent solution is the solution that worked for 95,000 years of human history that I alluded to a moment ago.
Remind me.
So for 95,000 years, human beings existed nomadically. The scenarios you are highlighting, yes, it did happen. There were occasions where different tribal communities would meet and they would try and take resources from each other. I'm not going to pretend like that didn't happen. But funnily enough, when you are a nomadic people, you can just pick a direction and leave.
That requires space.
Yes,
The world
I agree,
is
it does.
The world is
I agree.
circular.
And
You'll meet people coming the other way at some point.
Governments do, Simeon? They try and consolidate the space that they control so they can deny other people any access to it. Welcome to why I say no government is better than good government.
But hang on, no,
Actually, yes, Simeon, yes. Everything
no,
I
why?
said is correct.
Well, everything you said is correct, but it's not doesn't answer my point.
Actually, it does. I don't know how to explain this to you in any other simpler way, in any other way. There is a reason why.
Perhaps you've lost me. Perhaps you've lost
Simeon,
me.
there is a reason why gypsies, Romani, and travellers are amongst the most hated group of people in pretty much most countries, and it is because they are nomadic. It is because they do not respect borders. It is because they do not respect property rights as they are enforced by multiple states, because they ignore those things. And so the state, quite naturally, cultivates hostility towards those people.
The state cultivates hostility to them.
Absolutely, it does.
In what form?
In passing laws that makes their way of existence practically impossible.
Intentionally? Or is that just something that
Yeah,
the
I'd
government
say an inherent feature of. Yeah, I'd say there is an intent because it is about bringing populations within a state's sphere of control into line. As you say, the bigger guy coming along and saying, "You will do this. You will behave this way." Your contention is, though, that in the case of a good government, it's that group of people, at least, who are doing that enforcing and doing that dictation, have your best interests at heart. And I wholeheartedly disagree. Like, I'd say it is better that no one has that power.
You don't think the biggest person actually having the good intentions of the people, regardless of the possibility of it, is a desirable outcome?
I think that I think pretty much the entirety of human history points to the fact that they are few and far between.
But
And even when
exist.
they do occur, it is not something you want to rely on.
It's not. I'm not calling it reliable. I'm saying once the system does
Well, if it's
exist,
not
it can.
reliable, what's the
You,
point?
because Nor is a stateless government. Because a
Yes,
stateless
it
government
is.
is much. No,
How is
it's
that
not.
not reliable?
Because the 95,000 years that you just described was people moving to a new area. There are no new areas.
No, 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 no. It was people moving through shared spaces. It didn't take. Sorry, are you under the impression like it took 95,000 years for people to walk from Africa to like the tail end of South America? It didn't take 95,000 years, Simeon. They
I'm saying
existed and lived. Multiple generations lived and died in the same area. They just slowly migrated out. What are you talking about?
I'm saying that the population that we have, the population that we have now, the needs of the population that we have now, it's like because when were this 95,000 years that you're talking about?
So the first state was like Assyria, I believe. The first recognized like existence of like a formal, what we would recognize as a state. That was the
Hmm.
Assyrians, I think, and they came about in like. Let me Google. Apologies, I don't have these
No,
answers.
that's fine.
So, in it like so the argument would be in that time period, whatever that time period is.
Yeah, the
Um,
population was small enough that you could be nomadic.
well, there were a couple of things that happened. So for like a Mesopotamian civilization, they existed from the 21st century BC, so 2000 BC. Yeah. So that's kind of recognized as formally the first kind of statecraft. Though interestingly, the first city, like acknowledged city, was from 4000 BC, and that existed in a pretty anarchic state. In that every home in that city was of a similar size and filled with similar quantities of goods, which would seem to
Mm.
suggest there was very little class striation, if any. There was one centralized building, but that was clearly like a communal gathering area more than it was like a.
A stately home or something.
Yeah. There wasn't someone
Yeah.
in residence who was clearly in charge. And also, when we look at like their burial practices, everyone had a similar style of burial. So,
Mm.
like they existed in an anarchic state and they existed as farmers. Now, the reason it ended was, funnily enough, because the climate changed. So there was a period of time, very long period of time in human history, where a lot of archaeologists have theorized that most tribal communities could have existed by hunter-gathering only about 2 to 3 months of the year. It's only 2 to 3 months of work, and you can basically exist in leisure for 9 months of the year, just because of how abundant shit was. Unfortunately, I forget what it's called, but there was a global climate event that occurred that led to a mass die-off. This was beyond our control, and as a
Mm.
result of that, there was some calorific stress that occurred in a lot of different tribal communities, which is I think it was at that point that then people started aggressively exploring further lands, and I think it's at that point that the Americas got colonized. But and then the necessity being the mother of invention, people started like turning to agrarianism, and fishing and things like that. So that's when you see the first instances of what we would recognise as like major settlements. And again, they existed pretty anarchically. It wasn't until Assyria comes along and fucking ruins it.
Question. Is abundance of resources a necessary part to achieve success in an anarchist society?
I would say yes. I'd say that an inherent feature of like human beings become quite violent historically.
That's very honest of you, by the way.
When there is a perceived, I'm going to choose my words very carefully here. When there is a perceived scarcity of a resource.
Yes, for a perceived scarcity. Yes.
Yeah, because there are plenty of times when a resource is perceived to be scarce, but that resource isn't actually scarce. Right? It's how we convince people to engage in conflict that isn't real. We see this all the time. It's not the people in power that is why your wages are suppressed. It's literally the weakest, most vulnerable in society coming over in dinghies. They're why your wages are suppressed. You see the perceived scarcity that is being engineered there. Cool.
Yes, but I think that's a good example of my case that states controlling resources become states very quickly.
Yeah, which is why well, no, that isn't true. Like, so I bring your attention back to like the first cities. Let me see. I'm trying to remember the name. I'll send you a link to it. I do have it bookmarked because this conversation comes up an awful lot. So like the first major cities did not develop into states. They existed relatively stably for about 1,000 years.
Because they had abundant resources.
The reason they collapse is usually because of like sustained periods of drought, and in some instances we don't really know why they collapse. But the example I'm about to give, I think, existed for 1,600 years and was and collapsed due to drought, I think. But the point is, in that 1,600 years, your claim is that inevitably these things will consolidate into hierarchies of state power. But in 1,600 years, that didn't happen here. So I completely disagree with your contention.
Because of but that's because what you said about abundance of resources. There's no need to take control of someone else's property
when the settlement collapsed, you didn't get the emergence of a state as a result. I don't accept your contention.
Well, no, you got people like fighting over limited resources, and some people won.
Well,
and
there's
some
no
people
real
lost.
evidence that there was like a massive fight. I think people just migrated away.
Well, yeah, yes, you can migrate away as well, but there's again requires space to go to.
Yes, I completely agree.
And resources to take advantage of.
Which is why I unironically advocate for the ending of all borders, and people should be free to roam where they please.
No, given your politics, that's a very reasonable thing to say.
I mean, I agree. I mean, I think what I advocate for is completely and utterly reasonable. I mean, unironically, I think most people on hearing this, I think, would ultimately agree with me. Like
that a borderless state is the ideal.
The reasons for why.
No, I know. I think no. Your reasoning for why.
There's plenty of right-wingers who like to pretend like all they want is to be left alone. Everything I'm advocating for here is for you to be left alone. Like,
that's the whole. Yeah,
all over this.
That's your whole thing.
If you're real, if you're serious. So I've just sent you a link to the city I was talking about.
Yeah, I think this was my memory of this is only the Andrew Marr documentary that was on the BBC quite a while ago.
So good.
Yeah, which is. That was a fantastic documentary. You should watch that again.
So no, I reject the premise that statecraft is inevitable.
but you reject it based on, well, historical precedent.
Yeah. What else would you like me to use?
Well, given that governments do, how do governments come about if they don't just occur?
How do governments come about if it isn't inevitable?
How
That
no? How do
how it comes about is
how?
because
Okay, how do
occasionally,
governments come about?
because occasionally people's decisions aggregate in a way that allows them to come about. But that occurring, I would argue, is not inevitable. It just happens. There is no like inherent force. There isn't like a, how do I put this? I mean,
I think there is something. No, there is something within human nature that wants more to be better, to be more desirable, to be better off, to be
I
better looked
think in the
after than
current
other
economic
people.
system, that mentality is certainly cultivated in people, but I wouldn't say it's an inherent feature of human existence. No.
No, well, no, I don't say it's not. When I say it's inheritable, I mean it's an idea that someone could have and implement.
Sorry, I need
And
to.
given
Sorry, I zoned out briefly. Could you say that again?
it is so in an environment where resources are becoming scarcer, and you uh, you are a person you're in for example the existence of insecure people who wish to seek security, and within security and power, these people can come up with the idea of
So
let's create
you added a word there, which was power. Now, I don't think people
people.
inherently look for power. I think people start looking for power when, in their insecurity, they come across people who do not help them. And in those circumstances, if there is a
Not
scarcity of
just not help them but hurt
assistance
them as
of
well.
aid, well, that too. But like, it doesn't just have to be direct hurt. It can also be just apathy, right? If you're greeted with apathy, that can be just as demoralizing and destructive as outward hostility. Okay, um,
Hmm.
like like this is a point that this is an unnecessary distinction for the point being made here. So my argument would be, if you'd like to avoid these things from happening, people should. So how do I put this? So I'm much more a collectivist than I am an individualist. Okay. So an individualist would argue that they should be free to do what they want and not have to pay any consideration to those around them. I'm being very simplistic, and by do whatever you want, I don't mean like kill and be violent towards people. I just mean like, I want to play loud music and fuck everyone else, as an example,
Hmm.
right? Whereas a collectivist would argue that, like, no, our behaviour has consequences for others around us, and we need to be mindful of this. A key example of this would be like, are you aware of, like, in Japan it's a real faux pas to like enter a living space wearing shoes?
Hmm.
Yeah. So like everyone, like it's not state mandated. There's no law enforcing that, but everyone socially agrees that we conduct ourselves in such a way that we're considerate of other people's spaces, so we take our shoes off.
Hmm.
Right? That's an example of like a collectivist thing. Now, interestingly, you don't actually need like my point here is like you don't need the state to enforce this kind of these a collectivist idea. Although interestingly, there's some interesting things that happen when states try to enforce collectivist narratives. China would be an example. Um, but but like I said, all of the only way I think that should be enforced is socially. I'm not interested in creating departments or administrators that whose job it is to enforce that.
So just social stigmatization, the pushing out of people from from social gatherings, etc., based on the fact that they do particular actions.
If their behavior is unpleasant and people don't want to tolerate it, I don't expect people to tolerate it. So people can choose to do with that what they want, adapt or die. I don't believe that. I mean, you kind of see this with a lot of the culture war rhetoric with regards to cancellation. It's kind of like there are times in that discussion where it clearly isn't about the person being cancelled. What you're clearly angry about is that there's been consequences for your behaviour.
Mm.
Sorry, get over it. You could have not said the thing. There you go. Like,
Yeah.
what do you want? People are not
Well,
under people are
it's
under
no.
no obligation to like entertain you. This goes back to the
Mm,
post you did relatively recently, actually, with regards to like, is it possible to be pro freedom and intolerant? And I would say a
mm.
resounding yes. I am all for a person's freedom, but that does not mean you have to tolerate people.
It does not mean you have to tolerate. Well, that question was more around ideology. So the ideology of being
Yeah,
pro
I mean, your
freedom,
post was very
being
vague.
yeah,
So, I mean, so.
it was very vague. It was more of a philosophical discussion than anything else. But
Oh,
yes,
you
uh,
chastised me for going down that route.
no, I didn't. You were absolutely correct to go down. Did I? I apologize if I did.
Oh, this it read that way. Maybe I misread it, but
Mm.
anyway. So yeah, like bringing it back, I don't think like an inherent feature is that like I mean, don't get me wrong. There's an awful lot of religious rhetoric that likes to argue that no man must be ruled by kings. A lot of the Abrahamic faiths have this, for
Mm.
example. I
It's true.
don't think it's any coincidence that religion is used to help consolidate power.
It's
Um,
true.
that doesn't actually mean that human beings inherently
Mm.
need those things or indeed want those things. But you know, if you grow up in an environment that you know
Mm.
teaches you to simp for hierarchies, I can
Mm.
hardly begrudge anyone for simping for hierarchies. I just wish that you know when I pointed this out, people could just be like, yeah, you know what, that is that is a weird thing that we do. Maybe I need to examine why I do that and whether or not it's actually something I care about.
If hmm. uh what is the solution? What is the anarchist solution to fighting a hierarchy that you're not in?
My solution is mutual aid and community action. Create your own community of mutual support. So that can be things like uh, uh, developing community gardens together so that you can grow food, gaining energy independence, whether you do that on an individual basis or with a group. It's easier if you do it with a group. There's numerous examples of people trying to do this, and there's an art movement in London, for example, where they're trying to get essentially get an entire street in London off grid with battery banks and solar, so that you know that entire street is energy independent. They're gonna the goal being if it works, if they can pull it off, to turn it into a co-op, so every owner and like on that every person on that street collectively owns the power infrastructure. Um, so yeah, there's numerous ways of doing. Like the short answer is stop. Do as much as you can to avoid engaging in conspicuous consumption. That's the easier one. So that's like don't buy shit that you really don't need. Does that make sense?
Yes, that makes
Like
no,
conspicuous
absolutely
consumption here
makes sense.
being unnecessary. Like conspicuous consumption is essentially status signaling. You don't need a new car every 5 years. Maybe don't do that. You don't have to have meat with every meal. And it would be great if I could say that without you freaking the fuck out. That like, like anyway, yeah.
Mm.
Excuse me, I've just got cramp in my leg. I need to stand up.
Oh, ouch.
Oh Jesus. Oh sweet Jesus. Oh Lord have mercy. Oh, oh God.
That's pretty bad.
It's the deep state attacking me.
Ah, yes, you've said too much.
Anyway, yeah, like so that doing those things, that engaging in that kind of behavior is disruptive to the current economic system, highly disruptive to the current economic system. There's bigger things one can do for sure, but in terms of like small scale action, one can engage small scale praxis. Those are things. The long term goal would be to eventually get to the point where you have self sustaining communities that can exist externally from the current economic system. And there are places that do and have achieved this. There's arguably, in air quotes, entire countries that have pulled this off. Swaziland would be a good example. Swaziland
This,
is a semi-autonomous state that is technically part of Somalia, but it has managed to detach itself. It does have a government, just to be clear, but
Hmm.
it is a very different entity um, in that it actually has a stable government. The only problem they really have is just how profoundly poor they are in terms of GDP per capita. I think
Mm.
that they rank fourth in lowest GDP per capita. So they are an extraordinarily poor people.
Which is from your position a good thing then, right? Because
I
they're
mean,
not being consumerist.
they don't have like famines. Like they're stable when it comes to their food supply and their population. Um, uh, they There's certainly an aspiration. I mean, it's not for me to tell them not to do this. It's just you want an example of what it looks like when you achieve a society that is essentially detached from the modern day economic system. Swaziland would be a good example.
But
Um,
but 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 but, but to be clear, the poverty is the
I didn't say
and
poverty. I said they were poor.
okay, them being poor
Yeah,
the is the end state for ends is the desired end state.
they're not starving.
I'm not saying they're
So hang on.
starving, but I'm
Okay. This is going to be. This is going to be. Let me just make something clear here. They are poor in the sense that how we classify whether or not someone is poor says they are poor. But how we classify how people whether or not someone is poor is deliberately set up to support the status quo. So I am using a metric that the system I ardently criticize and am ardently skeptical of. I am using their metrics to describe a thing that I would argue is in their interest to disincentivize people wanting to emulate. So,
so this is
yes, they're poor, Simeon.
yeah. No,
But
this is no,
keep in mind what that term means in the context of
no,
what we're talking about.
I understand. I understand that. Yes, and so if we- in I always I've always, so I am very much an advocate for people who for 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 very wealthy people for getting rid of their wealth because ultimately their wealth is something that holds them back from engaging in proper happiness, which is
Okay,
socializing with people and
I mean,
being part of an equal group.
I'm for it because it helps reduce that consolidated power, and I'm against
Oh,
consolidated
yes,
power.
yes. No, I
Like
agree. No,
an
I very
added
much agree. But
bonus, an added
from a
bonus
individualist,
is they might be happier. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. No, I obviously, yeah, obviously, I agree with you from a macro perspective. I'm just looking at I'm always saying to the individual who's rich that the best thing you can do with your wealth is spend it on good things that make you, on things that make the world a better place. Because then you'll have a far greater social reach, which is ultimately the thing that will bring you the greatest happiness
Hmm.
through friendships and ties with people. This is what the ultimate thing that will bring people around like that. So yeah, I'm very much for a reduced hierarchy uh in terms
Oh,
of
there is
the
another caveat.
finance, but
Yeah,
it's
sorry, no, finish your point.
but the I but the I do but I'm you are you still I'll be honest, you have not convinced me at all that state hierarchies aren't naturally occurring, and the only way to prevent someone
Well, it depends what you mean by
present someone.
naturally occurring. Like, because okay, when you say naturally occurring, are we saying that states are a natural hierarchy?
I'm saying that states are so a very weak state is something that can come about from a collective group of insecure people, which do exist in nature,
Sure.
because collectivizing
Okay, but
and
what you've just
asserting some
described could
sort of
also be
dominance.
attached to a union, and I don't. Not all unions become states. There are examples of unions taking over nominally from the state. Um,
Yes, but you're saying can do, which means that there are ones that do, which means that
sure,
there'll
but it
be
also means that there are those that don't, and because there are those that don't, I don't think it is inevitable that they become states.
well, given enough time, everything that can happen is inevitable.
I completely agree.
So it is inevitable.
Okay.
So
If that's
and the
Simeon, if that is a satisfying argument for you, okay.
okay. Why are you not satisfied?
Because like that, one may as well say, uh, uh, water is wet. You will eventually be wet because one day it'll rain. Okay, cool. Like we have said nothing. Like nothing is being said here. This doesn't address.
No,
This doesn't contribute to this debate one way like at all. Like
no, but okay. My point is that an anarchist state is temporary,
everything's temporary, Simeon.
but an anarchist state is designed to be temporary.
Uh, okay, designed is an interesting phrase.
Okay, not design. No,
Like,
design.
an innate,
Design is the wrong word. I
an innate
apologize.
feature. I don't know. Okay,
Yes, an innate feature. Yes.
and well, I mean, so I'm going to be a little bit pedantic here because I don't quite like how you're phrasing this. An anarchist state? What the fuck does
Sorry,
that
not
mean?
an. Sorry, that was terrible wording. I do apologize. An anarchist ideal.
No, no. An anarchist ideal is so I would just to be clear, it is possible to be an anarchist and nonetheless advocate for state power. Just want to put that out there.
Yes.
The only thing that comes with being an anarchist is that you are inherently skeptical of all enforced hierarchies. Now, what you do with that skepticism and the conclusions you reach is entirely up to you. But the point is, anarchists, first and foremost, are just very skeptical of enforced hierarchies, whether that be government, the establishment, corporations, industrialists, the bourgeoisie, whatever you want to call them. Whatever your enforced hierarchy of choice is here, you are inherently skeptical of the power that those enforced hierarchies wield. And you are critical of whether they should wield it and indeed how they wield it. So the ideal the anarchist ideal, if there is one, is that everyone in society has that mentality where they are critical and skeptical of all enforced hierarchies. And with that comes an understanding that we will be very cautious in any enforced hierarchy that we decide to create. That would be the ideal.
Okay. But if you decide to create one, then it's in your mind at least it's a good one,
If you
or at least
decide to
has a good
create one, it
purpose.
is with the understanding that one day you may have to kill it in its sleep.
Yes.
That Simeon.
Well, but in that circumstances,
And no, I
you're
disagree.
less.
I disagree that it is with the understanding that it is good. It is
It's,
with the
it's
understanding that it will eventually be bad, and will need to be
unless
killed in its sleep.
unless you keep it good.
Cool. Unless you keep it good, cool. But
Yeah,
again,
unless
inevitably it will become bad. At which point you need to be prepared to kill it in its sleep. Like it's kind of like hence the phrase like government should be afraid of their people, not the other way around. Like all of this is
well, yeah,
anarchism.
government should be afraid of people rather than the other way around. But so when you set up these power structures, they have to be naturally easy to dismantle from the people's perspective, or at least easily replaceable. The people within power are very easily replaceable.
In my ideal, yeah, absolutely, that would be great.
Mm.
But we don't. I don't think it's.
Which
I don't think we
which
do
should be
exist in that environment currently. So.
no, I don't think we exist in an environment currently. I think we could do, and I think what you're describing is a state being kept good,
Okay.
or at least as good. So you're describing is a state, a person put in power with good ideals and good judgment starts off very well and eventually gets corrupted and eventually starts to get corrupted by power, but they're very easily
Or
replaced. So
whoever
they're replaced with
replaces them
someone.
gets corrupted with power. But then at that point, it has to.
Yeah, but you
But
replace
then
them
at that
often.
point, it has to be okay to kill them in their sleep. That's an interesting sell.
Why has it become necessary to? Why?
I mean, I'm using very emotive, loaded language
No, I know
deliberately,
very much,
and the
very
reason
much
I'm
so. But
doing that is because of the example you gave earlier, Simeon. So it's because of like the counter narrative you tried to do earlier, where you were examining like, well, what happens if a big guy comes along and tells you you will do this?
In a farming society, that's not a unrealistic prospect. I wasn't trying to be emotive. I was trying to say that's a
Sorry, what do you
thing
mean that's not an
that happens.
unrealistic prospect?
Well, because if you have a good crop yield, if there's no government, if there is no government to look after, if there is no government enforcing your property,
Okay.
then your property can be stolen
It
quite
certainly
easily
can be, but again, I will remind you of early history of man where the evidence does not support this. It
because
is
there's
only after states start being created that you start seeing things like that. That you start because it's only after states exist where the ability to have the administration to store specifically cereal crops in large quantities the way that states did. It is only after that happens that it becomes economically viable for marauding robber barons to form. Because up until that point, there was nothing worth stealing. Because no resource was like collected to such a high degree and consolidated into such a high quantity that behavior would be rewarded with success. So it's literally only after states exist that marauding robbers becomes a strategy that becomes economically viable.
but it's
I
also
don't know if you're aware of that.
no, no, I understand that, but it's also a case of
Welcome to why
there was
no
a
government is better
there,
than even a good
yeah,
government.
but there's also a huge population increase, which would be
Which
also the reason why
which has been shown not to be a good thing, Simeon.
it is good for people born.
Okay, is it though? Is it where people are born and now they have to essentially engage in serfdom and selling their labor in order to etch out an existence for themselves? Are you honestly telling me that's better? Because I
If
don't think
more
that's
people,
better, Simeon.
you think less
I
people is
think
better,
you are maintaining and cultivating an indentured class of people, all so that your material modern existence can be maintained. And that is an enforced hierarchy I'm very skeptical of, Simeon.
I don't think it's the case. I know. I think that's a very weird framing that for a
It
large
is the
population
anarchist.
so they
It
can
is,
work
and
for
sorry,
me.
it's not the anarchist framing. It's a anarchist framing.
No, I'm not saying. No, I'm saying what the framing you just, well, regardless of whether it's anarchist or not, the framing of I want a large population so they can work for me is not why I want that. Is
But
not what I'm saying at all.
Simeon, in order to maintain such a large population, you have to have states. That's
But a lot,
so that's a bad thing. You are creating the administrative class, the necessity for the administrative class, the owner class. You do see that, right?
but people have kids. People
But yeah,
want
I
to have
agree.
kids
And for 95,000 years, people just had kids, and the global human population was stable.
because people died from having kids, and kids didn't live all
No,
that long unless there's
replacement
some.
rate matched loss rate. Yes, people died from having kids. People also died from having kids under the state, Simeon. And in actual fact, funnily enough, due to state action during the witch trials, for example, midwifery fell through the floor, and infant mortality, and women's mortality like skyrocketed due to state
Uh,
action, no less.
yes. So, but
So Simeon, yeah, people have children. It's just when you have states, people start to have children in quantities that no longer become sustainable. Case in
within
point, the environmental situation we find ourselves in now.
within within states, so the state is necessary for a population boom.
I mean, I would argue it's that we're kind of approaching. Yeah, I'd say that. Yeah, actually, I would say that. No, sorry. What comes first is the state. The state then cultivates a population boom. The reason it cultivates a population boom is to further consolidate and increase its power.
So the population really increased, annual growth rate of world population. So the annual growth rate of the world population
Hmm.
really exploded in 1925, according to Wikipedia.
So that's when we learnt to synthesize fertilizer. and that got rolled out across global north economies.
So because there was the food
It was a
necessary
food
because
glut, yeah.
so there was now enough food to have more children.
No, well, I mean, there was a food glut.
I apologize. I don't know what that means.
So by glut here, I mean the household wages spent on food that went a lot further than it used to. That's not to say that, which isn't the same as saying that there was insufficient food beforehand. There probably was sufficient food. It's just people didn't have the money to buy sufficient food. Does that make sense? It's a
So
supply
now
and
people,
demand thing. The greater the
right?
supply, and if demand remains the same, prices go down. Yeah.
Hmm. So
So
people could afford to have more children.
they could afford to have the food to support more children. Yeah.
They could afford to have the food to support more children.
Yeah. And
Food to afford.
and it was a common practice then because things like pensions didn't exist. Your children were viewed as your pension. They would remember what I was saying about cultivating an indentured class. You have a
Hmm.
child who will then take care of you by earning a wage to pay for resources so you can take care of yourself
Live.
in old age. See what I mean about
Hmm.
it being indentured? Versus what we did for 95,000 years.
Which is die
Okay,
earlier.
and yet somehow we managed to continue existing for 95,000 years. In
As a species, yes, but we're talking about we're trying. My
Okay,
point is
okay. What death
I'm
doesn't
trying to talk about
occur? Death isn't
no
occurring right
no
now in the UK. Then
I'm trying to talk about individuals, what individuals want, what individuals do on a regular basis, which is want to have children, so have children, and want to live longer, so do live
I
longer.
mean, no. Currently, trends show that people don't want to have children.
Currently, yes, currently trends so that because there's more interesting things to do in the world, so people have less children so
I
that
mean,
they
that's
can do
one
the
way
other
of
interesting
putting it. If
things.
you ask most people, it's like can't afford it,
It is can't afford, but it's can't afford it. It is can't
which goes
afford
back
it,
to my point earlier.
but it's also can't afford it because you have because you have other things you can have to. Oh yes, people receive resources are more
Yes,
expensive now,
yes,
which is why
yes,
people
yes,
are.
Simeon. People could afford a house if they just stopped buying Starbucks lattes.
That's
You're
not what I
right.
said. That's not
No,
what I
okay.
said.
What is it you were saying then, Simeon? By all means, elaborate.
I'm saying resource. I'm saying resources are more expensive now, so we are going to see trends go down. Trends go down now.
Yeah.
Which, when resources become cheap again, people will have more children again.
I mean, it's bold of you to think it's going to become cheap again.
I don't think
What
it's
are you
going to become
basing that
cheaper
on?
again. I think if it did, it would become people would become more cheap. People, because people in times of abundance, in times of cheapness, people will have more children because people want to have more children.
That isn't a universal rule. So generally, one can exist in a time of relative abundance, but it's been shown that very specifically, if women have a high level of education and access to sexual health, those
This is true.
population explosions don't actually happen, even in times of abundance. So
That is no, that is very true. That is very true, actually. Yes. Uh, yes. So no, but no, people with the
welcome to
education of
why
women
welcome
and
to
the
why
employment of
a lot
women.
of the pickup movement is ardently against modern day feminism. Women should be breed mares. Like, obviously, return to tradition.
Oh yes. Why?
Don't trust a
Jesus
girl who's been
Christ.
to university. Like, it's something I've heard. Like, some fucking men's rights activists say.
Jesus.
Like,
Jesus.
why do we think that might be?
I just think that you are building an idealized system for a species that doesn't exist, and I think you should build another system that fits for the human race.
I think I'm building a system that is based on historical precedent, that factors in human psychology and human nature, and is based in evidence.
But
I think what you are engaging in is simping for statecraft, which is hardly surprising given you've been raised in it.
I I
Of
disagree because
course
I
you
think you
disagree,
are.
Simeon.
I know, of course, I can explain why.
Okay, sell me.
Give me
Actually,
reasoning.
sorry. I've been talking a lot. Like, you sell
Mm.
me on why good government. How do you bring about good government, Simeon? Right.
So So to bring about good government does require political engagement from the general populace, because the general populace are against large corporations and do want climate change addressed, and do want higher wages for everyone, and do want to see income inequality go down, and etc., etc., etc. A lot of things that the power class, the establishment, don't want. So it does require a huge increase of political engagement, and
May I ask something?
uh, of course,
If you have you ha- if so the solution you're offering, I'm going to do a little compare and contrast to the solution I offered and the solution you're offering.
yes.
In order to engage politically, one has to have the free time and the resources in order to engage politically. Do you agree with that?
Um, yes, one does have to have the ability to engage with politics,
Yeah.
which does require time, does require not
Yeah.
resources and so
Yeah.
on.
Cool. Yeah, we agree. Now, keep in mind when you asked me about my solution, I opened with giving explanations for how people can ensure they have access to resources.
Hmm.
What you are suggesting does not provide that. Do you see that?
No,
No, you don't
I
see that.
disagree.
Okay.
I do. I see where you're coming from, but
You think
I
that
think
people can
I think you're
engage in
incorrect.
activism on an empty stomach?
No, I
Oh,
think
okay.
that I think that I think as political engagement grows, the more political engagement
As
grows,
political engagement grows, okay. So in order to
yes.
start it,
So you start, okay. Yeah. So there is a current segment of society that's politically engaged.
okay,
The more people politically engage,
right.
the more, the more things that they want to happen happens.
Is that right?
Because
Okay. I broadly I agree with you, but the people who are most politically engaged and who have the most resources backing them are not the sort of people you would agree with. Um,
yes,
so,
but
but the
is
but
that a result?
the
No,
reason
whoa,
they're
whoa,
able,
whoa,
the
whoa, whoa, whoa,
reason,
whoa, whoa,
go
whoa.
on.
Is that as a result of low political engagement from the populace as a whole, or from high political engagement?
It's a result of those people having the resources backing them to allow them to do it.
Yes,
And what I
but this is
and I'll bring you back to my proposed solution. Yeah.
what is your proposed solution is that there is. I've
That
heard your end state. I don't know
first
your.
and foremost, one needs to ensure that one has access to food, water, and shelter. And there are a variety of ways one can go about doing that. And it doesn't require you having to sell your labour in order to buy food, for example. So, first and foremost, I talked about mutual aid, community aid groups, that kind of thing. That creates the resources that allows one to be a better advocate, to engage in advocacy, first of all. That was literally what I opened with, Simeon, with regards to my proposed solution as to how I bring about the world I want.
How do you? Wait, wait,
What
wait.
you're proposing presupposes the fact that people have the time, energy, and resources to engage in activism, and I completely disagree. People do not have the energy or the time to be informed consumers.
Um, I disagree. I disagree because the political engagement is so much more easily accessible than ever before.
That political engagement that you're referring to is massively financially backed, and I'll be blunt with you, Simeon, neither you or I are going to beat them on those terms.
Not through finance, but through more passionate means we can do.
Oh, more passionate means,
Through
okay.
more passionate,
One
more
can live on
intimate,
passion
more.
alone, eh?
Oh, but one sec. Just going back to something you quickly said.
Okay.
If I'm growing my own food and cultivating my own garden to have the
With a
food to
community,
live
yeah.
on, that sounds like a lot of work. What work do I have? What time and energy do I have then to engage politically?
I mean, I agree. It can be a lot of work, yeah. But the fact is, by doing that, you have removed yourself as a consumer. So you know those people who finance those air quotes activists who create
Hmm.
all those talking points.
Hmm.
They
They
pay
don't have.
them.
They don't have the resources now because you've disconnected yourself from
Well,
that hierarchy, so you're not.
they'll have. I won't say they won't have resources. They'll just have less.
Hmm.
So,
But they're also,
so
but they
first and
they'll
foremost,
have.
you are denying them further consolidation of power. What can come out of that is as communities form, because sure, if you do it on your own, I completely agree. It's a lot of work. It's why many hands make light work. You know, working together, collectivizing your labor tends to result in better outcomes. Would you agree?
How do I make my own Netflix?
How what, sorry?
How do I make my own Netflix?
How do you make your own Netflix?
Yes. As a
You
society,
don't.
we really like
You
we
don't,
as a
sorry.
society, you just live without it.
Sorry, are you saying you can't engage in activism unless you have access to Netflix?
No,
So why are you bringing this up?
because it's something that people will engage in. Or I know you're going to say
Okay, cool.
they choose to engage in it, but also people
No, that
will
isn't what I
engage
was
with
going to
it.
say. I was just going to say, okay, and what is this
Well,
bread and
then
circuses shit? Why the fuck do I care about why should I care about Netflix, Simeon?
because people really like watching, people really
So
like watching
fucking
it,
what, Simeon?
and we're trying to build a society based around people that really like to watch Netflix.
I'm not. What the fuck are you talking about?
What do you mean you're not? You're trying to create a new
I literally
society for human
said I
beings to
couldn't
live
care
in.
less about access to Netflix. In what way is that? In what way did you hear that and think, oh, he must want to build a society that help people access Netflix?
I don't think you want to build a society for people to access Netflix. I'm saying you want to build a society for people that really like watching Netflix
No, I don't know what about anything I've said has given you that impression. Please
because you want to
elaborate.
build it because you want to build it for people,
So an inherent thing that people need is access to Netflix. Is that what you're
not
telling me?
needs. Not no, not needs. I didn't say
Okay.
needs. I said
Where have
wants.
I ever? Where have I? Okay. I mean, I feel as if I've been very clear about conspicuous consumption and how you shouldn't engage in it.
Yes, but people want to engage in that.
That's fine, and they can.
So,
I'm not going to force them not to. Like, but in terms of,
but it's
but
just
in
about building a
terms of,
better.
oh my god, what has this
It's
got
just
to do
about
with the
bu-
conversation we were having? Holy shit,
but it's just
Simeon.
about build. It's just about building a better alternative in your position.
If you're wanting to bring about changes in the world, which I would argue we both do,
Hmm.
you have opened with. I asked you, how do you bring about a good government? What you said was better political engagement.
Yes.
Right. And the point I made to you is it is interesting you have opened with this when I would argue that a lot of people do not have the time to engage in that sort of political engagement. The reason they don't have the time is because
I
they are
have a
too
solution.
busy selling their labour so that they have enough money to live.
I have
And
a
when you
solution.
asked me how do I suggest we bring about the society I advocate for, I opened with addressing that very problem. Do you
Yes.
see?
No, I
Do you
understand.
see how
I
on
completely understand.
paper? Do
Yeah.
you see how on paper one of us is making a better case than the other?
Well, because I was halfway through making a case before you started
Oh,
any
okay.
questions about it.
Sorry.
To be fair. Uh,
So I
so
naively assumed your opener was like, "This is how we do it."
okay, if I may,
Yeah.
the increasing we want an increase in political engagement.
Okay.
As you grow political engagement, be better things happen, including giving people more free time. As people
How does that happen, Simeon?
well, you go to a 4-day work week as a start.
Oh, okay.
This is the first step. The first step towards it. The first step
So your
towards
first step is
better
pulling off
political
a 4-day
engagement is to
week.
give people is to get 4-day week. Then people will have more free time. With that
Okay.
free
Cool.
time, they can engage in more
Okay.
political activism. Then you have more people
Cool.
engaging political
So that's
activism. Then
more
you have
free
people.
time. That's more free time for people to watch Praga U, Turning Point USA, Fox
Uh-huh.
News. More free
Mm-hmm.
time for people to engage in that. Great.
Yes. This is so this people
Oh, more
engaging in
Netflix. Let's not forget Netflix. They got more time to watch
this is
Netflix as well. Very important, apparently.
well, if you compare it to Fox News, I prefer it because there are
What's the
more
next step?
inclusivity and diversity within Netflix than on Fox News.
Wow. Okay.
Um, uh, well, so as you increase political engagement, then people have a greater voice versus people like Fox News and other political outlets
How?
because
Like Fox News and Turning Point USA and Prague EU, they have like tremendous resources behind them.
they
Like
do have tremendous
they have their own like
resources.
streaming services and
They do.
like they even have like entire like media empires backing them. Like
They do.
how would you compete with that?
But because by engaging in political points that people actually want, rather, whereas Fox News doesn't want to promote.
I'm pretty sure plenty of people who follow like Prague EU and Fox News and all those content generators
Mhm.
genuinely believe that what is being said there is what they want.
Um, this is what they're giving. They're not saying what they also want.
Okay.
Someone who watches PragerU because they don't like trans people is also someone who wants a better wage and cheaper resources and for climate change to be fixed.
That you think people who watch Prague EU want climate change fixed?
I think there
You
is
think they acknowledge climate change as a thing?
I think there are people that watch PragerU that want. I think there are people that watch anti-trans videos from PragerU that don't watch the climate change videos because they think climate change is real and but don't
Okay.
like trans people.
And what about Fox News? You think there's viewers of Fox News who?
Well, let's look at polling on Republicans, where you go on Fox News and you'll watch people talk
So
about how awful
what has Fox News got to do with Republicans?
polling. Well, Fox News is watched primarily by Republicans.
Okay, not all Republicans watch Fox News.
No, but this is partly my point.
Oh, okay.
Polling 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 on voters reveals issues that major news corporations don't want to talk about.
Sure.
So if someone else
So
does
you're going
talk
to
about
provide
it,
the platform to talk about those things.
I won't, but
Oh,
Twitch will or YouTube
Twitch,
will.
YouTube will. Oh, okay.
Yeah,
And you think that those? So you just think by like voluntary association,
I think by
they'll
people talking
outcompete.
about, I think by people talking, by people having more time to watch people that do talk about the talking points they actually want talked about,
Mm.
that aren't being talked about in major media outlets because major media outlets don't want to talk about them because they
I'll be
involve
honest with you,
reducing the.
Mum. I'll be honest with you, Mum. I feel as if I'm going to achieve far more real world positive change if I just help my neighbours grow food and help feed them.
I if you
And then
hate
if
your
I can,
if you
and if
help
I
your
can
neighbor.
encourage and help other people to do the same, I think that would unironically be more successful than what you're suggesting. I mean, what you're suggesting is kind of like outpopular the populists, which I'll be honest with you, man, I don't think is a game you're going to win.
I disagree. I think
Okay.
populism exists. I think populism exists as a loud minority who are funded by people that want them
So
supported. I think
no,
that
no.
because
Simeon,
because other
no,
people are so
no,
busy.
Simeon. What you're suggesting is in itself a form of populism. You are saying you are going to outcompete the populists when it comes to popular rhetoric.
Because the populists, as you
So
describe them, are a minority of the
just to be
country.
clear, there are both right-wing populists and left-wing populists.
Uh-huh.
Okay, both tend to be authoritarian.
Uh-huh.
You are sounding like a left-wing populist, authoritarian as
Okay.
well, but because
Okay.
of how much you advocate for government,
Okay.
or at least the state being empowered to solve problems. Um,
Okay.
and what you're saying is that your solution to this is to out popularist them. You do see that, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. I don't think you're going to win that one.
I disagree.
Okay.
I think because if you just look at just look like every polling on major issues tends to lean left because because the majority of people are in a financial situation where they
The
can't
majority of people can't
continue.
even. But the majority of people can't really agree on what left and right means, Simeon. Let alone
I'm not I'm not talking about what left and right means. I'm talking about like stated political issues.
they can say that if they want, but as I'm sure you're aware, like how questions are phrased in polling data matters,
Yes,
and what
but
people take away from how things are phrased matters. So yes, I agree these polls exist, but I disagree as to whether or not they show what you think they show.
as an example, I can't remember what state it is now, but there was a state that leaned incredibly heavily Republican, and the Republicans are very pushed very much for anti-abortion bills, and yet when the populace when the people of those Republican states vote directly on those political issues, they vote against the Republican Party.
And yet the Republicans got into power.
Why?
I'm asking you.
Because they get into power because misinformation on what people stand for. What alternative is there?
The one I offered.
No, that isn't.
That is a solution.
No, because it isn't, because
Okay,
the power still exists because
Okay. I mean, I agree the power still exists. The point is to bring about the change that dissolves that power, and I've laid out a mechanism for doing that, and I've even explained how that mechanism would work.
What happens when your neighbour's offered a mango?
Excuse me?
When your neighbour you're feeding with British food
Sorry,
is offered a
we're
mango.
feeding each other, Simeon.
You're feeding each other, certainly, but what happens when you're offered a mango that you can't grow in the UK?
Okay. What do you think happens?
They buy the mango because they like the mango.
Sorry, hang on, clarify. So when you say offered, you mean offered to purchase. You don't mean like,
Yes.
Would you like a mango?
Yes.
Oh, okay, cool. I mean, if my neighbour wants to, get together enough money to purchase said mango, they are completely free to do so, Simeon. I don't really see what you're struggling with here. I've been very clear.
I'm not.
I have no interest
asking
in dictating to people what they
No,
can and can't do.
no. You misunderstand my question.
Okay.
I'm not asking you how do you feel about it. I'm asking what are the consequences of them doing so.
Oh, by them purchasing that mango, that means Monsanto continues to exist. Is that what you're getting
at? Yes, in a way, because a lot of people will do that.
I mean, yeah, you are pointing out the what happened. You're using the mechanism I described, and agreeing with me when I say that by engaging in consuming their products, you are helping them consolidate power. I'm glad you agree with me there. And yes, my neighbour could do that. And yes, in doing that, that would have that impact. I'm not going to prevent them from doing that. I am going to say to them, though, that the consequences of doing that is this. They can do with that information what they want. I firmly believe, though, that by creating communities that support one another, people will quite naturally be inclined to support their communities over things like conspicuous consumption. And again, the evidence supports this.
The evidence supports that people don't want to engage in enjoyable consumption.
When people exist in small scale communities, they are highly and support one another. They are highly resistant to external change. Yes.
Why?
Because human beings are inherently social. And when you exist in a community and things come along to destabilize that community, you come together as a community to fight that thing.
So it's social pressure that will be the thing that stops people from engaging in consumption.
Just as it has always been, Simeon.
But what about when everyone wants to engage in consumption?
Then you exist in the world as it is today.
And the consequence of that is
the death of the human race. In a very alarmist way.
So
to use very loaded and emotive language for a moment.
Yes,
which is why I don't think we should do that, and why I've been advocating for what I've been advocating for.
But people do want to. So we have a population that does want to game in consumerism.
They do, yeah.
So we try and move to a model of non-consumerism, but people continue to want to consume.
That's true. People may choose to do that. Yeah.
The consequence being.
Sorry.
The consequence being.
I just said.
So is it not better than to create a circumstance where consuming doesn't hurt people?
Well, yes, but the trouble is, Simeon, the mechanism you have laid out for doing that, I've pointed out the major flaws in, and I've
You
pointed out,
know,
and I've pointed out to you why mine is clearly more effective. Because on the
it's not, but
first,
it isn't
because on the
effective. But
first
it's not.
fucking hurdle, Simeon, you don't have an answer to this problem, whereas mine does. The problem being,
State the problem
people
again and
don't
let me
have
answer
enough
it.
time to engage in this kind of informed activism.
So let's
So
take what political engagement we do have.
first and foremost, Simeon, we need to create an environment in which people can engage in that kind of activism by ensuring that they have access to basic resources. First and foremost, and
Uh-huh.
the way we ensure that is not by getting the government to make that happen. We make it for ourselves, Simeon. Radical idea, I know. But welcome to the contention of this debate. Welcome to why
Or
no government is better than a good government.
or or we take what political engagement we have at the moment and advocate for people to have more time
How's
by
that
giving them a
going?
for, but
How's that going, buddy?
well, we currently have a Labour Party
That
looking to
isn't
win
in
a massive
power.
general
That isn't in
election
power. That is
that
a fucking joke. Yeah.
is set to win a massive election that currently is being persuaded to abdicate for a
Cool.
4-day work
And when
week.
it wins, what radical new change is it going to bring about?
It's going to bring about a 4-day work week.
Is it?
Yes,
I'll believe it when I see it, Simeon.
cool. You will. You're going to see it, and then people will have more time to engage politically,
Well,
and they'll
and
engage.
then the problem is when that happens, then you reach then there's the next problem. Now they have more time to engage in the really well financed populist right wing populist rhetoric.
Hmm. Which doesn't speak to them economically. So it'll seek that economic news from elsewhere.
Okay, if you say so.
Well,
So, like, what have we?
what
What's the conclusion here? I like.
the
I'm just aware of how long we've been speaking. We've been
no,
talking for about 100
I
minutes.
think I think we should we'll try and tie up now. I think my point is by slow increases of empowerment of the people to be around the government that take that the power of government is not so solid and becomes weaker because by the populace becoming more powerful and having more free time and being free to vote for people that speak to them economically, we can reduce income inequality, thereby meaning that we have even more power as a populace to then start taking on large corporations to stop them from polluting the planet and ensuring that those big corporations work for us and not for themselves.
Cool.
And it means we can continue to have MRI machines. We can continue to have chips which create technology. We can continue to live a better lifestyle than our parents and our grandparents, and our children can live better lives than us, whilst not destroying the planet and not subjugating large groups of people.
Cool. Done.
Yes.
The key word there, better lifestyle. The cost for that better lifestyle is, child-run, child-worked mines in Africa for minerals like coltan. There is no, like, even if one were to bring about a good government in one's own country, one still has the problem that globalization exists, that there are regions of the world where key resources are consolidated, and if to continue dictating access to those resources along state lines is to further reinforce things like child slavery and child labour. And sure, great, access to an MRI machine, but if the cost of that access to that MRI machine is child labour abroad, no thanks. I think it's much better, and I think I've made a very strong case for why, that one can take a hit to the modernity that one has access to, and nonetheless live, I would argue, a far richer and better experience in life. One can even take a hit, I would argue, but I don't actually think this would happen. But let's say even hypothetically one's life expectancy were to go down. Interestingly, I believe this year or last year was the first time life expectancy went down in the UK. Wonder why that is. But let's say one were to take a further hit to one's life expectancy. It's not the amount of years in your life, it's the amount of life in your years. And the current economic system and the way it operates is not about putting life in your years. It is about giving you as many years as possible for you to remain economically useful to the system. So, the solution: behave in a way that dismantles said economic system, which includes dismantling the state. And welcome to why no government is better than even a good government. That was fun, man.
That was good. That was a good discussion, and that was very educational. In case anyone is actually listening to this, I will say that I do think Matthew is genuinely smarter than I am. So I'm fully
Careful,
prepared
buddy.
to be
Careful,
wrong
buddy.
on this.
You're starting to construct an enforced hierarchy that makes me uncomfortable.
Well,
I'll be blunt with you, man. I'm not even joking.
Fair enough.
Here's the thing.
Well,
here's the thing.
okay. I think Matthew is a very knowledgeable and intelligent guy. So I do think he
I'll
is
be blunt.
very, even if you disagree with him, I think he's very much worth listening to.
I'll be blunt with
Very
you.
much.
The only reason I'm able to do that is because I have time.
Yes. Fair enough.
And bluntly, barring a few extreme exceptions, most people, I think, have the capacity to at least understand a lot of these concepts. I don't think anything I've said here is particularly difficult to grasp.
No. But I just I wanted to. I don't. I felt like I wanted to say that, so I said it.
That's all right. It's all good.
Yeah. The reason life expectancy has gone down in the UK because of Brexit. That's why. Everything's bad because of Brexit.
Wait, you know that for sure? Or is you
No, I don't. I'm joking. I'm joking.
I have a sneaking suspicion it's to do with particulate concentrations in cities. But basically, like, population has gone up, so car usage has gone up, so that even with catalytic converters, and like legislation to try and minimize like particulate concentrations in the air, it still nonetheless is happening. I think another problem is this is one of the reasons why the government is looking to ban diesel engines. A diesel engine that idles while stuck in traffic generates a considerable amount of particulates in the air. And yeah, like there's a very clear relationship between like particulates in air in city spaces and life expectancy.
No, I think it's a very good point. I also would mention just people being busier, people having to work harder and for less. So it means less time to exercise, less time to prepare food properly, less
100%.
healthy food, more salt laden food, more alcohol consumption.
Also, there's other stuff like sorry, no, this isn't other stuff, but I was like, this is also why like there's that 15-minute walkable cities movement, which is an interesting one. Like in terms of like a solution to urban spaces, a solution to problems in urban spaces is, I think they're called what are they called? Oh, Matt. Super grids? I can't remember now, it's gone. But essentially, creating 15-minute walkable zones in cities to disincentivize personal car usage. But this is a whole other conversation.
Yeah. But if anyone did listen to this, thank you very much for listening. And if this is just going up on political debate and crack and so on, come and debate us as well, you cowards. Come on, have a go. We'll talk to you as well.
Cowards is right. Yeah, thank you for making the time, Mark.
No, pleasure. Always good to talk to you, man. I am gonna go. So have a lovely day.
All right, boss. Bye, Z's.
Bye bye.